A stranger outside my home uses cat noises to try and lure 10-year-old me outside so he can kidnap me. I was around 10 to 11 years old when this happened, old enough to stay home alone, but not old enough to recognize some red flags. I attended camp over the summer, the typical 8 to 3 routine. My house is close to the end of my street, which forms a U, but for some reason, the bus driver would never drop me off at my house. I would always get dropped off at the end of my street, where I would toddle myself along back home. Both my parents worked late hours, sometimes not getting home until 8 p.m., and it would be very expensive to hire a babysitter for 4 to 5 hours a day, 5 days a week. So, starting 6th grade, when the bus dropped me off at home, I would be by myself. I do the usual middle school routine, play games online and watch TV. Occasionally, my neighbor's cat would come into my backyard, and I would feed and pet her as a way to get outside. The only computer in the house was in my dad's workroom, which was a window overlooking the deck and a window overlooking the side of the house. We have large bay windows in the living room, dining room, and kitchen of my house, and since we sit on a hill, you can pretty much see in the entire backyard from a nice vantage point. So most days when I got home, I toss off my backpack and go right to that room, and you could see me walk from my front door and pop up by the computer from outside. Unfortunately, this would lead to something that I had forgotten about up until now. When I got off the bus, I did as expected, go into my dad's workroom and play computer games. About 30 minutes into this, I hear faint meowing coming from the outside window. I pause the game and look outside, thinking maybe my neighbor's cat had wandered over. Nothing. I just sat back down and resumed playing, only to hear the meowing again. It was quiet, but noticeable, and so I checked the other window. Nothing again. This routine happened for a good 10 minutes, and eventually I got frustrated and went into the living room to watch TV. Not even 2 minutes later, meowing from the window was sitting right beside. Now I was confused and a little creeped out, so I shut the blinds and kept trying to watch TV. The meows continued, but only when they came from the window right behind me did I jump and leave the living room, visually skeeved. I went into my bedroom, where the blinds were down but still cracked for some sunlight. I tried to read a book, only to hear a meow come from outside my bedroom window. This was enough to make me call my dad, concerned that maybe the cat was hurt, but I couldn't see it to be sure. He said he would have the neighbor come check it out and call me back later. 10 minutes go by and I get a call from my dad saying he was coming home from work. Nothing urgent in his voice, just that his job had gotten canceled and he could come home early. I thought nothing of it, and when he got home did I realize the cat noises had stopped. Fast forward to the present and I asked my dad about the strange incident, thinking it was funny the cat had followed me around. What he told me next made my blood run cold. After I called him, my neighbor did indeed come to check on the house. What he found were large footprints, leading in circles all around the house, clustered close to the walls so that even if I looked outside, I couldn't see anything. Someone had been stalking me through my house, seeing where I was through the windows, and making cat noises to try to get me to come outside. They must have known I was home alone, since it was easy to see me walking by myself down the street and let myself in. My neighbor immediately called my dad and searched the property, but found no one. The police weren't called since there was nothing but footprints that led off into the woods and got lost, and I never saw anyone. My dad stayed home with me for the rest of the week. It sickens me to know that there are people who would use these tactics to try to lure kids out of their homes, and from there, do whatever they wanted with them. I can't imagine how terrifying that must have been. I've never heard of something like this before, but I don't doubt it could happen. You're a very smart kid to not get baited by those noises and stayed in the house. I'm glad your dad was able to keep you safe. It's good he stayed home with you for the rest of the week, too. Did they ever find out who did it? What happened to the person that attacked you? Do you know what they wanted? Why would someone do something like that? I'm sure it was terrifying. But it sounds like your dad did everything he could to protect you and keep you safe. And he probably saved your life by staying home with you and keeping an eye on things. It's also great that he told his friends about what happened so they could keep an eye out for anything suspicious in the neighborhood. I unknowingly saved my life by telling a serial killer to F off. In 2006, I was a college student at ASU. I lived in an off-campus apartment on the ground floor, and it was a block off a major street here in Phoenix called Baseline. These details are important. In the summer of 2006, Phoenix, Arizona was plagued by 2 serial killers. One was the Phoenix shooter, who ended up being a team of 2 guys randomly shooting people, and the other was the Baseline killer, a rapist and murderer. Having 2 serial killers put the entire city on edge, and everyone was talking about it. I even saw articles in Time or Newsweek about the situation. So, the fall 2006 semester had just started. Now, you may have heard this, but Phoenix is hot in August. It would get stuffy in my apartment, and so I'd leave the window cracked a little because the morning air is nice. The blinds provide visual cover. Anyways, one morning, a strange sound woke me up. It was the crack of dawn, 4:45 a.m., and the sun was just barely coming up. It was the sound of someone lightly tapping on the window, and it seemed intentional. In my tired state, I figured it could be a bird or some branches or something trivial. Tap, tap, tap. Silence. After about 90 seconds of nothing, the tapping returned, and it was absolutely purposeful. I was positive it was a human producing this noise. I thought it was my boyfriend, who thought it was cute to try and scare me sometimes. I decided I'd be a bit of a brat and make him wait, but I was also getting really angry. How dare he pull a prank when I'm trying to sleep? This is just like him. I'm going to give him a piece of my mind about disturbing my sleep like this. Tap, tap, tap. At a certain point, I got up to get a glass of water, still being in the mindset of wanting to annoy my stupid boyfriend who thought this would be funny. But I saw some movement through the slit in the blinds, and I marched over and yanked the blind so I could see. Definitely not my boyfriend. I said very loudly, "What the frick?" He sort of seemed taken aback by my anger, but only slightly. The man I saw will be with me forever. Or more specifically, his eyes and the feeling they gave me were insanely creepy. Honestly, words can't do justice to how terrifying his eyes were. They looked like black orbs with no white in them. Absolutely predatory. When I see pictures of Ted Bundy or Charles Manson, that's exactly what he looked like. Even if you saw a picture of how they looked, it's different when you experience it in person. It totally floored me. Something about this man was profoundly wrong. He was crouched down like an umpire. He had on dark pants, a dark purple shirt, and a dark Nike hat. He had dark skin. I thought he was Hispanic, but later I found out he was a light-skinned black guy. You'll find out how I learned his name later. Anyways, after I yelled, "What the frick?" at him, he whispers to me, "Can I talk to you?" If you want to know how insanely creepy that is to hear, just whisper that sentence out loud to yourself right now. It still sends chills down my spine when I think of how that sounded. His hand subtly moved towards his waist. I later learned he would blitz attack his victims and he probably had a gun. All that separated us was a mesh screen. Now, this is about a 3-second interaction at this point. For some reason, I thought of Ted Bundy and how he'd pretend to be crippled to target his victims. I thought of my mom telling me not to be nice to strangers. Don't be afraid to be a bitch. My thinking wasn't as calculated as all that, but it was more the nano-processing of how to deal with the situation. So when he whispered that, I started yelling at him. "Hell no! Get the frick out of here, douchebag!" I shut the window angrily and locked it. I can't overemphasize how incredibly irritated I was that this person had the audacity to disturb my precious sleep. I laid back down and wondered if I'd been too mean. What if he needed help? But that didn't really make sense. Why would he be tapping and whispering if he was truly in trouble? I decided he was a creep after all. I was too annoyed to go back to sleep, but I sort of laid back down. I told my roommate about an hour later and she sort of jokingly asked if it could have been the baseline killer. When she said that, my heart sank. His face looked exactly like it did in the police sketches that were on billboards everywhere. The only problem is that those billboards showed him with dreads, and the man at my window had no dreads. Apparently, he was some sort of disguise artist who'd wear wigs. Updating the police sketch would have been a nice move, but they didn't. I called the Phoenix police, and the detective I talked to agreed that it sounded like his MO. The suspect would say something to throw off his target, and then he'd blitz attack. The detective said that my angry response probably made me seem like too much of a hassle and moved on. The only problem was that I had thought the guy looked Hispanic, and the detective said many witnesses described him as black. I thought they might want to come out and try for samples or surveillance video or something, but I didn't hear back from the detective. My parents freaked out. They got us knives, pepper spray, and put up signs. We learned another tenant had complained that same morning. I never learned the details, but this idiot was apparently going around the damn complex trying to find a target. The stupid apartment wouldn't let us have a release, so we moved to a second-floor apartment right above our old unit. Anyways, on September 4th, 2006, they arrested Mark Godot. I think the detective didn't call me back because they were days away from arresting Godot. When I saw his mugshot, I was sick, but also relieved. He was absolutely the guy outside my window. To me, he looked like he could be Hispanic. You can judge for yourself if you Google it. He's on death row in Arizona now. His wife tried to mount some campaign to show that the police were framing him or something. On a personal level, it certainly would make for an interesting coincidence if this poor innocent man who they framed was also whispering like a creep and tapping my window. I can't think of anything more scary than a serial killer tapping on your window. That actually happened to me. And if it happens to you, just scare them the right back. Don't be afraid to be downright rude to someone who's injecting themselves into your space. It could save your life if you're not afraid to throw your weight around and tell someone off. Trust yourself. You can still be a kind and generous person and still someone to frick off. Elise would absolutely not keep me in that building after an experience like that. I actually love that you felt guilty for possibly being too rude at first. Says a lot about how large a disparity there is between you and he, in terms of humanity. I'm glad you're okay and that the police were helpful, but I would definitely keep a lookout for any suspicious people around your neighborhood. I saved my family from a home invasion by staying up later than the intruder. The house I grew up in was very large, with my bedroom being at the front of the house by the street and my parents all the way down the other end. The garage was next to my room, with a window looking in, and I would keep this blind up to help me wake up in the morning. My bed was then against the other window which faced the street. This story happened when I was 16 or 17, and I'm a girl and I don't have any siblings. As a teen, I tended to stay up quite late, cruising MySpace and chatting to friends on MSN. One night, I was sitting in bed doing so. It was around 4 a.m. when I heard distinctly human snoring coming from the other side of my window. I quickly ran down the other end of the house and woke my parents. Dad went to investigate and said it must have been a possum or koala as there was nothing there. The next night, it's a similar thing for me. Stayed up late, except this time, I turned off all my lights and was just laying in bed listening to music very softly. About an hour later, I heard a bang right outside my bedroom window. Now, after the night before, Dad was grumpy enough at me for waking him up. I lay there for a few seconds longer, contemplating what to do as I knew he'd be angry at being woken up a second night in a row before I said, hell to it, and legged it down to my parents' room. Dad wasn't having a bar of it this time, so Mom said she'd walk me back to my room. Upon getting to my room, the light in the garage was now on. Remember, I keep this blind up, and I swore to Mom that it was off before. She went and got Dad, who went to investigate and found the roller door up. As he walked towards it, it started closing. He thought the electricals must have been glitching as it was a bit stormy and we all went back to bed. The next morning, Mom woke me up to apologize. Someone had smashed our car window open and stolen the roller door remote. We never kept the house door on the other side of the roller door locked, and they shut the roller door on Dad so they could get away. I always think about had I stayed in my room any longer and heard the door going up and seen the person walk past my window, what would I have done, as there was no way I'd be able to get to my parents' room in time? To break in the middle of the night, knowing full well that everyone was home, still gives me chills over what would have happened. My parents then went away for the weekend, leaving me on my own. I slept the next few nights in their room with the door locked, my hockey stick, every knife in the house, and the house phone. Not a lot of sleeping happened though. I'm so glad you were able to avoid anything terrible happening. If I were you, I would have just ran out of the house. But that is just me. I am sure that your parents would have been extremely proud of you for staying in your room and protecting yourself and your family. Also, I believe they would have been thankful that you woke them up before something really bad happened. I was on someone's kill list. After high school many years ago, I was in a bad place. My guardian had kicked me out after graduation. She didn't help me find a place to stay, so I lived in my car for a couple months. I met some heavy metal dudes at work one day. I had seen them around town, and all of my other friends knew who they were. Everyone loved them. We became friends over a couple months, and they offered for me to move in with them. I agreed. Looking back now, I wish I had just stayed in my car. My two main roommates were brothers, named Andrew and Seth. They were in a band. They also believed in the occult and anything of that sort. I never really believed in that stuff, but I'm not one to tell someone what they should believe. They had let me live with them rent-free for several months, so who was I to complain? Being the only female in a house full of young men, I was always looking over my shoulder. You never know who you can trust. Turns out, I was right to worry. Over time, their friends started to stay with us for longer periods of time, sometimes weeks. Their friends were another group of brothers that they had gone to school with. There were 5 brothers in total, but only 2 stayed with us consistently. The younger brother, Mark, was very polite. He cleaned up after himself and always helped with the household chores. The other brother, Adam, had a laundry list of mental problems. He had apparently done some bad drugs back in the day, and it had developed into what seemed like psychosis of the religious sort. He had done time in prison for assaulting a woman with a Bible. He would often look you in the eyes and tell you he could see how you'd die. Once, he told me that I was possessed by a demon and I needed my soul cleansed. Everyone in the house knew he had these problems, but he was their friend. They helped him through the hard times and gave him a place to stay. Otherwise, he'd be on the streets. I was always on guard around him after the things he told me. No one else seemed to be as concerned as I was. They should have been. One day, I was sleeping and my phone rang. It was my boss. He asked if I could come into work an hour early. It was only 12 p.m. I was broke and had nothing better to do, so I said yes. I got up and began getting ready to leave. I walked out into the living room to see Mark and Andrew sitting on the couch, while Adam sat on the floor by the TV. He was watching scripture videos on YouTube. Some real end-of-days shit. That was fairly common, so I went about my business. I said goodbye and left for work. My shift at work was almost complete when the phone rang. My boss answered, handed the phone to me and said, "For you." I was just a cashier, so I assumed it was a friend that couldn't reach me on my phone. I answered the phone and heard a man's voice that I didn't recognize. "Hi, This is Detective Williams. Something happened at your apartment today and we need you to come to the station to talk about it. I left work immediately. I'd assumed one of the brothers had been arrested for drug dealing or something. I was very wrong. I got to the station and was buzzed in. An officer escorted me to a small, cold room with a camera. He gave me a bottle of water and left me by myself for about 30 minutes. My mind was racing thinking about what could have happened. He came back in and informed me that Adam had stabbed and killed Andrew at around 1 p.m. I was shocked. I had just left the house an hour before it happened, and everything seemed fine. I asked if there had been a fight. The detective informed me that there hadn't been a fight, and it seemed to have happened out of nowhere. I gave my statement to the police officer, and left with nowhere to go, still in shock and confused out of my mind. Our apartment was a crime scene, so I went to another friend's house to watch the news report, since the police wouldn't give me any information on the case. Over the next couple of days, the information began to be released. Adam hadn't just stabbed Andrew once, not twice, but he had stabbed him over and over and nearly decapitated him. After the murder, he ran down the road, still holding the murder weapon. He called 911 and informed them what he had done. I watched the news report in horror. We had known he was unstable, but this? He had fully confessed to the brutal murder and provided police with his notebooks. He had apparently been planning to murder all of his brothers, my roommates, and me. He thought we were possessed by demons, and this was the only way to free us. Luckily, none of his other intended victims were there that day. Mark unfortunately witnessed the murder, but he luckily escaped. If I hadn't gotten that call from my boss, I wouldn't be alive today. So, to the man who brutally murdered my friend and wanted to murder me, let's never meet again. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. I really hope you're doing okay, because this sounds really rough. I don't know what I would do if I were in your shoes. As for the guy who killed your friend, there's nothing anyone can say to make it better, but at least he will never be able to hurt anyone else again. That's the only thing that makes me feel a little better about this whole situation. If I were you, and my friends knew this guy personally, I would tell them not to visit him in prison, or even try to talk to him or anything like that. You never know what he might do next. The creepy guy who almost followed me home at 4 a.m. I'll start by saying I'm a 21-year-old female university student who lives in a small town in Greece, Europe. It's a safe town full of university students, and I live in a safe area. I've never felt in danger before until that Saturday. 2 weeks ago, I was at a birthday get-together for a friend at a restaurant with a bunch of friends and uni classmates. We were mostly drinking wine, but it was enough to get me tipsy. I hadn't eaten much before going out, and I'm kind of a lightweight when it comes to alcohol. After we had dinner and drank, everyone started to leave, and a smaller group of friends and acquaintances of us decided to continue after the birthday party for bar hopping. It was me, 21 female, the guy that was our designated driver, 21 male, and 3 more girls, 20 to 21 years old. We went to some bars to dance and ended up in a typical nightclub. All of us tipsy at this point, even the guy, but I was the worst of them all, getting really dizzy after having more and stronger drinks. After dancing for a couple of hours, and the drunken feeling only got worse, I decided to go home. Not really the type of person who wants to vomit in club bathrooms. Besides, I wasn't too familiar with these people to have myself be seen like that. I told them that I was heading home, and they suggested to walk me home, but my house is a half an hour away from where the club was, and I didn't want to make anyone walk all the way there and back, since they weren't going to stop partying and the designated driver didn't seem well enough to drive. I could feel that I wasn't exactly walking straight, but I had a sense of my surroundings and I knew the road like the back of my hand. It was 3 to 4 a.m. on a Sunday morning, so there were people still outside returning home from bars. Plus, I lived in a small city in Greece where nothing ever happens, and I've never felt in danger before. And I returned home on my own at this state often. I was around 15 minutes away from my house, walking past a kebab place that was open 24/7, when I heard a guy yell, "Hey you, sweetheart, don't go, I just want to talk." Since I was the only female walking on this road at this hour, I realized he was talking to me. I tried to take a quick look behind me and saw a tall guy in an Adidas tracksuit and a hood over his head walk quickly after me. I felt an adrenaline rush and I began to walk fast. I tried to get past my drunken state and think clearly. My house was in a dark area and I had to walk through a dark corner behind a grocery store to get there. I'm a sucker for true crime and horror movies, and this felt like a real horror story coming to life. I heard him yell at me to stop one more time and that he only wanted to talk to me, but I didn't stop. I took my cell phone out from my jacket and pretended to be on the phone. The only people awake I could talk to were the ones in the club, who wouldn't be able to hear their cell phones through the music anyway. 5 to 10 minutes later, I stopped hearing his footsteps, so I put my phone back in my pocket and slowed down, letting my guard down. He probably got bored and left, or so I had thought. As I was walking, I suddenly heard his voice again, and this time he wasn't far behind me. He was walking right next to me. I felt cold sweat all over my body. "Why are you running away?" he asked. "You're so beautiful, I wanted to talk to you." I said nothing and started walking faster. He seemed around my age, and he had a cigarette hanging from his mouth. "Do you have a boyfriend?" he asked me. "Yes, I do," I lied. I thought that if I lied that I was dating someone, he would stop harassing me and go away. But he didn't. "That sucks. You must be a lucky guy. Can I have your number? I'd love to take you out for some coffee." "No thanks. This is creeping me out, honestly," I replied. "I won't hurt you. My name's Jim," he said and stretched his hand out to me. I hesitated but shook his hand and then started walking fast again. I said my name to him, but he had no other information about me. Come to think about it, I should have lied. But I was drunk and scared, so I just said whatever came first, naturally, my name. "I really have to go," I said and took my keys out. I was only 5 minutes away from my home where my roommate was sleeping. "Fine. Your boyfriend must be very lucky," he told me and stopped trying to catch up with me. I felt relief rush over me and I almost started running. I checked behind me one more time when I figured he wouldn't see me and he seemed gone. I don't know if he was actually not a threat and really just wanted to ask me out, but did it in a creepy way, or if that somehow I managed to survive a sexual assault, or worse. All I know is that I'm never walking home on my own at that hour, that drunk. I'm glad that you're okay. It's really scary that this happened to you, but it's good that you're alive and you can tell us about it. What I would do if I was in your situation is run as fast as I could towards a public place with people, a bar or restaurant, so he wouldn't have the chance to hurt me. If he did try to hurt me, scream as loud as you can and call the police right away. As long as you're safe, nothing else matters. If you enjoyed these stories, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell. Check out the other videos on your screen right now. Otherwise, you're definitely the jerk.